Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our second topic meeting. We will get started in just a few minutes here. Thanks a lot for coming tonight. Welcome again for those who are just joining us. We'll get started in another minute or two here, just letting a few more people sign on. Welcome, everyone. I think we will go ahead and get started. We still have a few people joining in, but so we can get through everything tonight, I think we will get going here. So again, welcome to everyone for joining us. This is our second in a series of 4 topic meetings as part of the comprehensive planning process. We want to thank everyone for coming tonight. We appreciate it. We look forward to hearing from you during the meeting. My name is Phil Chafing. I am the project manager for the Stantec team that is working with the City of Saco and the Planning and Economic Development Department to kind of run this comprehensive plan process. And we're really excited to be here tonight to talk about transportation and mobility in Saco. Can I have the next slide, please? So tonight we're going to start off with a presentation that just sort of sets the stage for our conversation. We're going to recap the vision and the guiding principles for the comprehensive plan that were developed from our first phase of work. Then we'll have a panel discussion with a couple of local representatives from regional planning organizations, as well as the City of Saco. And then for the second part of the meeting, around 6:45 or so, we will break into small groups so we have a chance to hear directly from you about some of your perspectives and ideas on how you move around the city today. Next. Just a couple of housekeeping items. This meeting is being recorded. If you could please remain on mute during the presentation, we would appreciate it. And then during the small group breakouts, everyone will be able to unmute to talk. So first off, I just wanted to talk a little bit about kind of our project timeline. We're now in our topic exploration phase. Back in January, we had our public kickoff meeting, and that was really the beginning of our community visioning phase. And we conducted an online survey and some mapping exercises that helped us put together a vision statement and a set of principles, which I'll share in just a moment. And right now in our current phase, we are working to dig into some of the topics of the comprehensive plan. Last week, we talked about downtown. Today, we're talking about transportation mobility. We have 2 more meetings coming up in May. So this is beginning to develop some initial strategies that will feed into the comprehensive plan. Next. So I wanted to start off by talking about our shared goals and our shared vision statement. So as I mentioned, in that first phase, we had our public kickoff meeting, we had a survey, interactive mapping exercises, we've done some stakeholder interviews, looked at a lot of the past planning work that has been done, including Bridge 2025 and the current comprehensive plan, to develop a vision statement working with that long-range planning committee that is really kind of the guiding theme and statement for the plan. And I do want to read this because this is an important element of the comprehensive plan. So that first statement there, Saco, a community for a lifetime. that was something that really resonated with a lot of the long range planning committee members, the idea that Saco can be and should be a place for everyone, from kids and students through young adults just getting started, people who may be then raising families or may choose not to, and then older adults, whether they have lived here their whole life or have chosen to come to Saco later in life. Saco is a community for a lifetime. It goes on then to state that Saco is known as a welcoming city, small city, committed to managing its growth to build a better community for all and for a lifetime. As we grow, we continue to preserve our rich historic and natural legacy while celebrating our defining assets, a vibrant downtown, cherished beaches, the Saco River, and natural open spaces. And so that's the vision statement, in 10 to 15 years, what we are striving to accomplish here in Saco. And a lot of these elements exist today. And this comprehensive plan is about continuing to bring those out and to strengthen them. Next. So this vision statement is supported then by a series of 9 guiding principles. These that you see up here address the main topics in the comprehensive plan. So they talk about the importance of downtown as the lively core of our community, about expanding economic opportunity, providing a variety of housing options, designing a connected mobility system, which is our focus for tonight's meeting, growing our environmental stewardship, promoting health and well-being, building resiliency, investing in our schools and our infrastructure, and strengthening our fiscal position. So these are the 9 guiding principles that help us to achieve our vision, but they're all interconnected. While they're listed as separate principles, they all feed into each other, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later today. So with that, I will hand it over to Liza Cohen, part of our Stantec team here, in just a moment. But first, I'd like to just run a quick 2-question poll here. We wanted to get a sense of how people were hearing about the meeting tonight and how many of the previous meetings you have attended. So we'll launch this poll here for everyone. You should see this pop up on your screen. You can just check the box for these 2 questions. That would be great. Part of this is to help us understand, how we're reaching people and how we can continue to reach people. I'd encourage everybody here at the meeting to, share, with your friends, your neighbors, colleagues, information about this topic meeting series. We, want to see and hear from as many people as we can during this. So helping to get the word out is always greatly appreciated.
Phil, just doing a sound check while we wait. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great.
All right, so just looking at the responses here, it seemed like about a third of people were hearing from a City of Saco email, and a third hearing from other sources, which is interesting. And then, some from our social media posts, as well as word of mouth. And it looks like for about a third of participants, this is your first comprehensive plan meeting. So welcome, we're really excited to have you here. A third have been to all of the meetings so far, which is great. We appreciate your dedication to this. So thank you very much. And with that, Liza, I will hand it over to you. Thanks.
Great. So yeah, I'll echo Phil's thanks, and we're really excited to hear from you all. We're going to walk through essentially a diagnostic of Saco's transportation system. So a whole bunch of data, and then hopefully that tees up a really good conversation at the end to hear from you all in terms of, the qualitative experience of actually getting around in Saco. So with that, we'll sort of walk through each mode. The first thing that we always like to take a look at is where are the people, right? So jobs in general, if you look at this map, it's a heat map of job density. So downtown Saco will always show up down here on all of these maps. And this is I-95 running through town here. So, you can see there's jobs concentrated around Route 1 as well as in downtown Saco. And then, fewer jobs over on kind of the western part of the city. And then the housing concentration is much more centered around downtown. So again, sort of just keeping those things in mind in terms of where people are and where they might be needing to get to. Looking at the roadway network, I probably don't need to tell all of you this, but roads generally funnel traffic through downtown. So, you have the main roads of Route 112, 5, 9, and 1, as well as the interstate running through town. The other interesting thing that's very unique about Saco is you have a couple of significant barriers. So you have the river and you have I-95, and those make it challenging to create additional connections, additional roadways. So that in turn helps kind of increase the pressure on those roads to really carry vehicle traffic as well as people walking, people biking. Every street needs to do additional duty. The volumes, reflect this traffic volume. So these numbers don't actually mean a ton on their own, but you can see where, heavy demand is. So coming in from kind of the western side of the city, as well as, of course, travel on Route 1. What does that mean for all of you? Maine DOT measures congestion in terms of roadway, how many cars are on the road versus the capacity of that road. And so they've identified Industrial Park Road, probably to nobody's surprise, as the congested corridor, as well as Route 1 running through downtown. Part of that is, of course, because driving is the main way that people choose to get around Saco. Now, we don't have great information on what people do outside of their commute, but the US Census, of course, asks everybody how they choose to get to work each day. And in Saco, 82% of folks drive alone to work in their car. You have 10% of people who are carpooling, which is actually a relatively high percentage in terms of what we've seen elsewhere. And we also took a quick look at the commute time for what people report as their commute time. You can see the chart on the right. So in general, average commute time has really held steady over the last 10 years, somewhere around 24 minutes. But of interest to us was, you can see there's sort of a slight dip in the orange line, the number of people who commute for 15 to 30 minutes, and a slight increase in that brown line, the number of people who commute for more than 30 minutes. So curious to hear some insights as to how that impacts you all. And of course, with all this driving comes greenhouse gas emissions. So this is a map, again, a heat map. So darker red means more emissions, lighter oranges and pinks, I guess, mean less greenhouse gas emissions. And you can see the city of Portland up here in the northern portion of the map. Generally, where things are denser, where trips are shorter, where it's easier to walk and bike and take transit to get to places, greenhouse gas from household auto use is relatively lower. So overall, in terms of the city of Saco, greenhouse gas is relatively high for the region. Took a look at your transit service, and you have some really great transit assets. So of course, there's the train, which you see running through in lovely Amtrak blue here, but also BSUB bus service, which is mostly concentrated along Route 1, which again is where those jobs are. However, the frequencies are fairly low, with a bus every 1.5 to 2.5 hours. That means that it's harder to just kind of say, oh, I think I'm going to head downtown and go take the bus. You really have to sort of plan your day around it, or plan your commute around taking the bus. We have heard that the Zoom is very popular and has a very dedicated ridership, which is great. And of course, transit doesn't cover everywhere. So it serves key destinations. So again, thinking back to those goals, transit does a good job of serving supermarkets, of helping people get to health centers, but it misses some. The Kimball Health Center is circled in red there at the southern portion of the city. And then of course, the entire area west of I-95, which is a challenge to serve. Things are spread out, but there's no transit service there today. And then when you go to take the bus, a key part of that experience is the bus stop, which sort of serves as the gateway to the transit system for any rider. And while the Saco Transportation Center, which has recently been upgraded, is excellent and provides really great rider amenities, there are a lot of stops that look more like the photo on the top left. So a sign, but no place to wait, no comfortable shelter, and you can actually see the grass is worn away where people are waiting there in the grass. So there are ADA challenges associated with that. So those amenities definitely vary, and that impacts people's experience and ability to take transit. Despite that challenge, transit ridership is growing. BSoup told us that their ridership has increased by 20%. A lot of that is from seasonal trolleys. Some of that is on the Zoom, and then the shuttle bus. And then the Downeaster train service is also growing, and I believe they're planning on adding another train. So that's excellent. When I lived in Maine, the train didn't go as far north as it did. So it's great to see that service growing. Looking at sidewalk coverage, the sidewalks today are limited to the downtown area. So you can see that on the map here, and they don't really extend out into the neighborhoods that are more residential. But that being said, if you zoom in on downtown, sidewalk coverage is generally good, which means that people have a safe place to walk where they're not interacting with cars, with the exception of driveways and curb cuts, of course. Most schools and some of those key destinations like supermarkets have sidewalk access. One of the exceptions to that is the Saco Middle School, which, there's some sidewalk access along Buxton Road and heading to the east, but trying to get there on a sidewalk from anywhere else would be a challenge. And the impact that we see from things like walkability and sidewalk access is reflected not only in greenhouse gas emissions, but also on the burden to a household to own a car. So on average, households in Saco spend about 22% of their household income on transportation. And housing and transportation are often the two biggest cost burdens of a household. So when, I believe the average annual cost of owning a car is estimated around $9,000, although I'm sure, there's estimates all over the place, but it's maintenance, it's gas, it's storing the car, it's all kinds of things. So that can really add up. And you see that in downtown Saco, that cost burden, which is shown on this map here in a slightly lighter color, is slightly less. And some of that could be the ability to walk and again, take shorter trips to more places. You have this looking at bicycle access now. So this map is showing trails in dark green, on-street bike lanes in light green, and then proposed trails in the dashed green. You have this really cool feature in the Eastern Trail that of course ultimately connects to both the north and the south, but has an on-street portion that runs through Saco and through Biddeford. And that's a really wonderful regional amenity. However, your downtown or general circulation for your bike network is limited. So there's not much of a connection to area parks, to the western neighborhoods, down to the beaches. And we actually just don't know a lot about bicycle parking. So that's kind of a gap in the data that we've identified that might be worth looking into. So of course, the challenge is, and Pat will be the first to tell you, is fitting amenities for all of these different modes onto our streets, right? But one thing we always like to take a step back and think about is, who is street space for? It's something that communities spend a lot of money to maintain. And when you think about it, typically you think about, okay, the picture on the bottom right, I need to drive my car on the street to get to wherever it is that I'm going. But it's also a place where people walk their dogs, where kids go for a walk, where you might have people playing in the street, where people want to ride their bike. So we try to think more broadly about who uses that street space, because it's often, in some neighborhoods, it can be the only public space available, and kind of how that space is allocated. So we took a quick look. This is a cross section of Main Street in downtown. So if you were to kind of chop across the street, how the space on that street is allocated today. So on this particular section of Main Street, there's really three travel lanes, 2 parking lanes, and then a pretty wide sidewalk, 9.5 feet on one side and 11 feet on the other side. But essentially what that means is, if you look at this overall cross section, the majority of the street is devoted to space for cars, whether it's car storage or car travel. And you don't see a lot of space devoted to bus shelters, buses, bike lanes, people walking, that sort of thing. So that all gets back to kind of your bigger goals and what you're trying to accomplish in your downtown, and whether this allotment makes sense. Beach Street going out to the beach has some extra space, has that wide sort of 7-foot shoulder alongside. In this particular location that we looked at, there are sidewalks on both sides, but we know that that's not the case throughout the entirety of Beach Street. And then of course, we took a look at residential streets, which generally prioritize vehicle traffic. So you get a street like Pleasant View Drive or Plymouth Drive, which are located just outside downtown and down by the beach respectively, where the street is very wide, but all of the space is devoted to vehicles, or a street like Park Road up in the northern portion of the city, where the street is very narrow, but again, all the space is devoted to vehicles. So finally, we took a look at crashes. So these are crashes involving people driving, people walking, people biking, and it's sort of a heat map. So you can see Main Street starts to pop out here as the site of more crashes, also along North Street and Industrial Park Road again. And what that signals to us is, if you think about, for every crash, there's a few near misses, right? And for every near miss, there's, you know, something that somebody looked at and didn't feel comfortable dealing with, so they took a right instead of taking that left, or they didn't cross the street right there. So this pattern really shows us that Main Street and to some extent Elm Street are acting as barriers that people may not feel safe traveling over, whether they're walking on 2 feet, using a wheelchair, biking. Those streets sort of stood out to us, and there have even been some fatal crashes. And so that indicates, you know, a design issue. So this isn't the first time that transportation has been talked about in Saco, and I'm sure many of you, you know, if you're here tonight, you've offered advice before and thoughts to the city. We tried to capture some of that from both the survey associated with this project as well as other projects. So, you know, things that we've heard: preserving the beautiful rural roads and scenic routes that run out to the west, ideas about new connections. For example, Lord Road in the very western side of the city comes in from Buxton and makes a turn, and the Saco version makes a turn, but they don't actually connect, which was interesting. School day traffic congestion in kind of the heart of the city. A desire, really, one thing that stood out to me was a desire for safe walking and biking, whether it be down to the beach, along Route 1, up to the beach to the north, as well as, you know, issues to do with really complicated intersections, especially when the train is blocking the intersection. So, you know, signal timing, some suggestions for places to put in turn lanes, and of course, parking challenges at the beach, typically more seasonal, as well as downtown. That being said, the city and its allies have a lot going on. There's BSUB, who's working on transit stop access improvements, electric buses, as well as a downtown circulator. And hopefully we will hear a little bit about that from our panel. There's been some traffic calming efforts on side streets that intersect with Main Street. There's some signal upgrades coming to that Main Street intersection. I believe there are some beach parking upgrades in the works in terms of just making it easier to navigate around the parking that's available. There's a study being done for multimodal bridge to cross the Saco River, as well as, of course, the transit-oriented development project and the exit 35 and 36 improvements. So a bunch of neat stuff here. One thing that stood out to us was the downtown signage that I believe the Bicycle and Pedestrian Committee has pulled together, although Pat and Bob can correct me if I'm wrong, but these kind of stop speeding before it stops you type warnings, which of course are indicative of a larger problem as well. So finally, we took a very high level look at the budget. And our big takeaway here is, you know, the city of Saco spends $2.5 million annually on transportation related stuff. And a lot of that is, you know, maintenance and plowing and, you know, everyday needs. Transportation is expensive and you can't have all of the things all of the time. So hopefully through this process, and this is, you know, what we'd like to hear from you tonight, we will be able to prioritize where Saco should continue investing that money. So going back to Phil's principles, and then I'm almost done, I promise. We wanted to kind of assess how we as, you know, the consultant team think Saco is doing today against those principles. And then we're going to ask you to weigh in. So The first principle is looking at downtown as the lively core of the community. Sidewalk coverage downtown is great, but we did notice that, there's crashes on Main Street, and Main Street really prioritizes vehicle flow, potentially over walking and biking or hanging out. Expanding economic opportunity for all is a great principle. One thing that we noted is it seems that living car-free or car light in Saco is challenging, and there are real costs associated with owning a car, and there are challenges to using other modes. Provide a variety of housing options. The emphasis on driving today really influences the type of housing options that you can offer, of course, because you need to have the roadway capacity to carry all of those vehicles if you're going to continue having housing that's really focused on people being able to drive there. And then, of course, you need space for all those vehicles and whatever it is that you're building. Looking for a connected mobility system. The bicycle network is somewhat disconnected today. Got some good connectivity on transit, but perhaps challenges with frequency. Growing environmental stewardship. The big thing that stuck out to us here is, of course, the greenhouse gas emissions. That's sort of the obvious one. Promoting health and well-being. I think we've heard from folks really a desire for walkability and bicycle connections and the ability to kind of move your body and get exercise. I know that's been big for me during the pandemic in particular. And actually, if you look at park usage in Saco throughout the course of the pandemic, you can see that park usage is way up. So people are trying to get outside. Building resiliency, that limited road network makes that challenging. If something goes wrong with one road, you don't have a lot of backups. Investing in schools and infrastructure. Most schools have sidewalk access nearby, which is great. So, we'd love to hear from you about more kind of specific issues near schools. And then strengthening the city's fiscal position. Again, transportation infrastructure is expensive. And again, that just brings up that need to really prioritize improvements. So I'm going to leave this up for a second. With that, we're actually going to jump into our panel discussion and hear from Rick and Pat and Stephanie. And then again, we'll come back to you all who are here to ask you, what did we miss? What other gaps are there in the system, and how else can Saco get closer toward meeting its goals? So with that, I think I'm just going to bring up this slide, which has everybody's name on it, and I will call on our lovely panelists to speak in this order, if you don't mind. Surprise, Stephanie. And just tell us a little bit about some of what's going on in the region and in Saco.
Sure. Let me just start off. You can see on the slide, but my name is Stephanie Carver, and I work, actually my office is in Saco, right down the street from City Hall. I work in the Saco Mill for a regional planning organization, Southern Maine Planning and Development Commission, and our organization works on economic development. We manage brownfield funds that have made a lot of investments into the mills in Saco and Biddeford. We do transportation planning. We manage an MPO down in the Kittery area. We do land use planning. We do a little bit of everything, actually, some grant writing. So my job there is transportation director. I started about a year ago. So although I'm fairly familiar with Saco, I'm still learning about the region. I think the panel or Stantec and the Saco staff wanted me to talk a little bit higher level about some of the regional trends that we're seeing in transportation. So I'll be quick because I know I only have like 3 minutes, but so basically just at a real high level in the state of Maine right now, obviously things have shaken up quite a bit this year with the pandemic. We saw initially when everyone kind of went into quarantine, there were folks that were able to work from home. A large number of people were able to do that. And it took a lot of cars off the road during those commuting times that we used to see kind of peak volumes. So nowadays, shortly after that quarantine, we started to see a rebound pretty quickly. And I think a lot of people were a bit shocked at how quickly that happened. The difference, the nuance there, though, is that rather than seeing those peak volumes at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day in normal commuting hours, we saw more kind of consistent traffic throughout the day. So people kept driving, but they were just driving more steadily throughout the day rather than that morning and evening commute. So other kind of characteristics that we're starting to see, and we're hearing some of this anecdotally from folks that we work with at police and fire agencies, but we're seeing generally higher speeds out on the turnpike and even on some of our local roads. So we're seeing, I think what we're going to see in time through the data, once the data catches up to all of this, is possibly more severity in some of the accidents that we're seeing. So there are definitely some safety concerns, especially as Liza said, with more people out and about these days, wanting to get outside, jogging, walking the dog, whatever they can do to kind of be outside and enjoy that lifestyle. So, I think that's the general high level dynamic that we're seeing. In terms of bike ped, like I said, there's, I think, what we'll end up seeing in the data when time goes on is, if we're able to collect that, is that more people are biking and walking when they can. Public transportation, though, has had a lot of challenges. I don't know if Craig Pendleton from BSUB is on this call, but they've, I think, had some sharp declines as a result of the pandemic, and I think that's starting to climb up again. But it is, an opportunity for them to start looking at some more transformational projects. Liza mentioned the downtown circulator. Our offices help them with some of the public engagement around that new service, which is kind of a circulator service that will offer public transit service in and around downtown Biddeford and downtown Saco, sort of in a loop, to serve, some of those mills and some of the employers in downtown. So that's kind of a new innovative public transit program that we're starting to see. Federal funding has always been a huge challenge at the local level, state and federal level. We definitely don't have enough money to manage the projects that we need to manage. Transformational transportation projects are always a challenge. The scale that we're working at in Maine generally is pretty small. We have to phase out projects to get them done, which is challenging and often can be more expensive. But I think the general consensus is that there may be more opportunities moving forward with this new administration. We're starting to, some of the regional organizations have been working on earmarks and trying to find larger regional projects that might fit the bill, and our congressional delegation is working on that with us. So, we are starting to see some possibility of some additional federal funds coming on board. And I think at our organization, I'm sure Rick's at Greater Portland probably feel the same way. We're really trying to mobilize our regions and get our towns to start working together and talking about what those larger projects might be, so we can be prepared for any opportunities that might come our way to apply for some of this federal funding. So that's kind of generally in a nutshell what I wanted to say.
That's great.
Has any questions for me?
Yeah, I think let's have Patrick go next, and we may have some time for questions in the middle. I'll leave that to Phil, but thank you so much. And Patrick, do you want to chat for a few minutes about what's going on in Saco?
Absolutely. Thank you. A lot of familiar names on the list signed in tonight. I wish we were sharing an auditorium instead of screens. I haven't seen a lot of you in a long time, but it's nice to see everybody logged in. So I'll stick to what I do know. And if I don't touch on a mode of transportation, it's because I'm not the expert in it. So I'm going to start with the condition of our network. In the early 2000s, Saco was putting almost zero. There was a year that I think our entire capital plan for the city was $65,000. And when you have hundreds of millions of dollars in assets, that's not going to cut it. The city has made great strides in that area. So today, our roads are in better condition than most. Our sidewalks are free of major hazards. Our annual maintenance plan is well funded. So it's nice. We can start looking at other things besides just band-aiding our existing infrastructure together. So it's a good place to be that we are maintaining what we do have. And that's important because you really can't move beyond that until you start doing that. I think a lot of people wonder why doesn't a sidewalk go further in one direction? Why does a road narrow? Why does our infrastructure end where it does? And I think it's important as we look forward to know what the major factors, at least from my point of view, there's really three things that affect what we have and what we can do. And the first one is land. You can have all the money in the world, you can have your permit. If you can't retain the land rights to widen a road, add a traffic signal cabinet, put a sidewalk down, I'll give Ferry Road as a great example. Why isn't there a sidewalk all the way down Ferry Road? Well, you have to cross 20 privately owned parcels and negotiate land access with those people to fit the sidewalk because the right of way is only so wide. We've run into the same thing along the Route 1 corridor. We have money to expand a sidewalk network, but we're hung up on land rights and getting the access to build it. Second one is funding. We're fortunate to have access to some great organizations and state funding programs so that all of our improvements don't land on the backs of Saco taxpayers. But at the same time, it takes a long time to piece together funding mechanisms to pull off job projects that are costing, construction projects are 30% higher just over the last couple of years than they were before. So funding is always a trick, but I think the big thing is the time it takes to piece together enough funding mechanisms to bring a project to fruition. The last one is often environmental. People will scratch their heads because a sidewalk has a beautiful esplanade and then all of a sudden crowds into the roadway or becomes narrow and or a roadway might have a dimension that impedes bike or pedestrian travel. And a lot of it is because of natural features or habitats that during construction, the original roadway went around that. So when we go back and try to expand at this point, we're right up against wetlands, habitats, we're having to widen or oversize culverts to allow for fish passage at streams. So environmental becomes a real tricky avenue to go when you get into expanding, especially existing infrastructure. So those are the factors that go into what we'll probably discuss and look to do in the future. And the last thing, I think the largest thing going on right now that I can at least point people in a direction to get more updates would be the Route 112 corridor. There's very few things in Saco that can fill the auditorium with people wanting action. There's a couple, there's Camp Ellis erosion and there's the Route 112 traffic issue. Those are the two kind of largest topics I've seen in Saco. And there is a solution coming. It's a compromised one, but it's one that can actually come to fruition, and that is new turnpike ramp access directly to 112 for commuting traffic to get on and off the turnpike. North and southbound, east and west on Route 112 directly without having to go down Industrial Park Road. So we have an entire section of the website dedicated to that. So I encourage people to go to the City of Saco website, look for the Route 112 section. You can see the latest plans from the Maine Turnpike Authority. The latest timeline on that is that what was originally projected to be a 2022 to 2024 construction will now be 2023 to 2025 likely. So it's still undergoing final design and permitting. And it with the pandemic, some of the construction's probably pushed out just 1 year. There's a lot that we'll have going on to improve the rest of the modes of transportation and the local neighborhood access, while the turnpike is taking on the commuting portion of the issues along 112. So I think I will end with that as far as updates on the local level, and happy to address questions after we get through this panel discussion.
Great. Thanks so much. Yeah, I should reiterate, Phil noted in the chat box, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. And if we have time, we'll do a few live and then we can respond online as we go. So finally, let's hear from Rick Harbison.
Great. Thanks, Liza. So my name is Rick Harbison, and I'm a planner at the Greater Portland Council of Governments, which is kind of the northern counterpart to Steph's organization. So the transportation with arm within GPCOG is called PACS, and that stands for Portland Area Comprehensive Transportation System. It's kind of a mouthful, but through PACS, we work with municipalities, Maine DOT, other groups to allocate funding for transportation projects. So we have a lot of projects and studies throughout the region that are going on right now. I think the one that is relevant to Saco, the most relevant, is our transit-oriented development plan that Liza referred to earlier, where the study area is the Mill District in Biddeford and Saco Island in Saco. And so transit-oriented development, it's kind of a wonky planning term, but the basic idea is to increase the density of residential and business development in areas that are within walking distance of really high quality public transit. And the benefit of transit-oriented development is that it supports growth and economic development in our urban areas. So that in turn reduces development pressure in our suburban and rural areas. It also creates more opportunities for people to walk to work, to walk to get your groceries, your lunch, your haircut, whatever it may be. And then since transit works better in denser places, it also increases the viability of transit and reduces dependence on driving to get around. And as Liza mentioned, there's typically less greenhouse gas emissions associated with urban places. So over the last year, we've been doing lots of outreach with community members, with stakeholder groups. We've also had a few online surveys as well. And we've heard lots of great feedback. In many ways, the area is already a really strong model of transit-oriented development. So you have lots of development or redevelopment happening, really creating that density. And then you have the Saco Transportation Center. That's the hub for all the bus routes and the Downeaster station. So really the area is in an enviable position for transit-oriented development. So the focus of our plan is more about identifying opportunities to improve access to transit. So increasing the overall walkability of that Mill District area, the ability to bike around in that area, improving wayfinding and signage, so it's not as confusing. And then we're also looking at ways to enhance the transit service itself. So as Liza mentioned, like improving frequency would be a big first step there. So in the scheme of things, that project is a little bit of a smaller project, but we've been working on it for the past year. And right now we're very close to having a draft plan ready. Hope to have that ready in June. The other project I thought I'd mention real quick is our long-range public transportation plan for the region that we just finished. And that's a much bigger project. It's called Transit Tomorrow. And that's basically a 30-year vision for where we want to go with transit at the regional level. So there's lots of recommendations in there, including a downtown circulator within Biddeford and Saco. But the big one, I'd say the long-term one, is that Biddeford to Saco to Portland, the corridor in between, was identified as one of 4 priority corridors for exploring rapid transit options. So things like bus rapid transit or commuter rail. So if you're not familiar with bus rapid transit, it's kind of where you have designated bus lanes and the buses act a little bit more like trains, so they can bypass congestion, and it's more of an express service. And then the idea for commuter rail would be to really enhance the service on the rail line that's there now, either using the Downeaster or a different type of train. The end goal is just having rapid transit that is also very frequent. So that's an idea that's going to need to be studied more, and it'll take some time to develop, but it's in there in that plan, and that's really the first step. And I'd say that's one of the bigger recommendations that came out of that Transit Tomorrow plan. So I'll stop there.
Excellent. Thanks, Rick. So Bill, I think I'm going to turn things back to you as far as where we go next.
Great. Thank you very much, Liza. And thank you very much, Stephanie, Pat, and Rick. We really appreciate your perspective on what's happening regionally and here in the city. I think that was very helpful to get some of that context. I do want to get to our small groups. Right now, I just see really kind of one comment in the chat box, which is in regards to truck traffic and kind of impacts on quality of life and traffic downtown. You know, Liza, I don't know if you want to just briefly talk about some of the regional, pressures that lead to that. And then if we have any further follow-up, we'll post that in the meeting summary online.
Seeing a hand wave from Patrick. Not sure. Did you want to?
I could just touch on it really quick. I
Sure.
think one thing that we've dealt with locally recently kind of came to light through interactions with the police department, local shipping destinations, and then some truck companies. We had a series of accident damage through the intersection at Elm and North Street. And then come to find out, most of them were from one trucking company, and it is due to Route 1 being a trucking route. I think we did learn some things about, there are routing softwares at some of these trucking companies that send them down the no toll routes. So it's something that I think we're gonna look to work on now that we understand. I didn't realize that those sort of existed and pushed people in that direction that weren't necessarily going there. So I think that's something we can work on in the short term to get those trucks back on the highway. These trucks were not going to local destinations. They were simply following a tracking system that brings them around toll plazas, essentially. So I think that's something we're going to address, and hopefully it helps with that a little bit.
Great, thank you, Pat. All right, so with that, I do want to get to our small group breakouts. So Liza, if you can skip ahead a slide or two here. In just a moment, we're going to send everybody into one of 2 or 3 breakout rooms. I think we'll do 3. And we had 2 questions that we wanted to hear from you on. The first is, taking a look at our citywide guiding principles that we talked about at the very beginning and that Liza summarized there at the end, to talk a little bit about how Saco's transportation mobility system today is or is not meeting those goals. So what we're trying to do is identify for this comprehensive plan, places where the city is doing well that we want to continue to improve and support, and places where there's room for improvement in, both the near term and thinking longer term into the future. The comprehensive plan's a 10 to 15 year plan. So it doesn't necessarily need to be something that has to happen, next year. It can be something that we work towards over 5, 10, 15 years. So we'll spend 15, 20 minutes talking about that. And then the second question is to hear about your own personal experience with the transportation system here, and particularly some of the gaps in the system. And so this is, asking you to think a little bit more, how you get around today, but also how you would like to get around in the future. If you would like more bicycle or walking options or particular connections between specific destinations, things like that. Again, that'll help us as we're developing strategies for the comprehensive plan to know, where are areas we should be focusing on, what is most important to residents here. So we'll have our breakout conversations till about 7:20. I'm going to ask Isabel to give us a 5-minute warning in the group to kind of start to wrap up, and then a 1-minute warning. If you've done these breakout rooms before, you know that at the end, when you get sucked back to the main room, it's pretty abrupt. You just get cut off mid-sentence. So I apologize in advance for that. And then the one last thing I will ask, if each of the groups can please identify a spokesperson. When we come back to the full group, we're going to ask each group representative to just give a quick little 1-minute summary of, sort of the top 2 or 3 things that you talked about. So with that, thank you for your attention so far. And we're really looking forward to hearing from everybody in the breakouts. So Isabel, if you can send us there, we will see you in the breakouts in a minute. Conversation within their small groups. Have 5 or 10 minutes left here to wrap up. Let me pull up my screen here again. What I'd like to do is ask for a representative from each of the breakout groups just to give kind of a quick minute recap of some of the things that you talked about in the small group, kind of highlights or things that were most interesting. So the group that was led by Liza, do you have a spokesperson? And if so, you can unmute yourself and just share a couple of brief themes with us.
So I elected myself the spokesperson because I forgot to have us pick one, but I'll do my best to share some of the themes, and then folks should definitely share if I missed something or misconstrue something in the chat. But we had a really great discussion, mostly centered around walking and sort of the impediments to being able to get around. But I'll say with particular interest for people with mobility challenges, whether that's, older residents or others. And we had a really good conversation hearing from Jean, who actually serves in an official capacity working with a community of older adults. About the challenges that they face today, trying to take a bus to a healthcare appointment and then needing to walk for quite some time once they get off the bus, or trying to take the bus to get groceries and being only able to carry a certain amount of groceries on that bus. So she pointed out several models that work in communities like Saco that I think are definitely worth considering for this context. And she's been doing a lot of great work gathering that information and gathering data. We also talked about just the issues with kind of truck traffic going through downtown and along Route 1, and the rumbling and the fumes and the noise, and how that really makes for an unpleasant walking environment, in addition to, when the sidewalk cuts out. And then, let's see, I'm just looking at my notes here. I think, not feeling safe, having a safe option to bike to the beach, which seems like such a delightful thing to do recreationally and for health, but just the connections down to the beaches really don't feel safe, and there's not a protected bike connection there, particularly given that drivers seem more distracted with what's on their phone and that sort of thing. So I think I'll stop there unless there's anything huge that I missed. I apologize, group.
We'll have all of these notes from the small groups will be summarized as part of the meeting summary that we'll be posting online next week. So you can check back on the City Comprehensive Plan webpage for that. So thank you, Liza. Sandy's group, Do you have a spokesperson? Or perhaps Sandy, could you give a quick recap of your notes? Oh, Sandy, you went back on mute. Sorry. There we go.
Now? Okay. I was just starting to ask that question when we got bounced back. I don't think we got, or I missed the 5-minute warning. I only saw the 57 second warning. And so I did we got it. It was a great discussion. Unfortunately, we only got through the first page of questions, but we got some really good, I think, discussions going on. So there was a lot of talk about wanting to get people out of their car downtown and problems with parking, the need to kind of freshen up sidewalks and get better lighting in downtown for safety. There was a comparison to the type of Biddeford street lighting that's used, and it's much brighter and it feels safer walking there in the evening than in Saco. About another pedestrian bridge. There was, I know, and this has come up before in other discussions talking about transportation, Saco, having to do with the Amtrak and the train blocking traffic and the idea of moving that loading ramp down toward Biddeford and getting it away from the intersection so that the trains didn't just stop in the middle of the street there with the traffic. The frequency and the visibility of public transportation and that first and last mile connection, how to get to, if the bus drops you off on Route 1 and the medical facility isn't right there, how do you get to that last section of your where you need to go. We had a lot of discussion about the development that's happening on the west side of the turnpike and the interconnectivity that might be required to get people downtown, that there's a lack of either bike or pedestrian sidewalks crossing over the turnpike, and how that is going to be worked out. And also whether maybe some kind of a park and ride on the west side so that people could access public transportation in some way, accessibility and public transportation to the industrial parks. And on the ferry road, there was one very good suggestion about having the bike path, maybe working with the state to go down ferry road, down Bayview and actually into the state park there to create bicycle connectivity from downtown straight to the beach, the state park beach down there. There's that, and the rest of it, I guess you'll see when I figure out how to send this to you. That's as far as we got.
Thank you very much, appreciate it. And then the third group was mine, and I was actually, despite my best efforts, nominated by my group. So I'm sorry that you still have to hear from me. But we also had a really good conversation. It was pleasant to hear that it sounded like everybody gets out and walks pretty often. They enjoy it. They mentioned, either walking in their neighborhood or along Main Street downtown because of the businesses and things to see. A couple of the highlights that I'll just share from our group. One was the connection between quality of life and just feeling safe when you're out walking and biking, and some of that certainly is traffic speeds that we heard about in the presentation, and so that certainly factors into just your overall perception of the city and your quality of life. The second thing was just a kind of a reminder and recommendation to make sure that we do look at all parts of the city relative to transportation, and we certainly will. Downtown is an important part of the system because it's where a lot of those pieces and parts come together. But it is also about how to, get around other parts of the city, how to get from different neighborhoods into or out of downtown, but just to make sure we don't focus too much on that. And we certainly will look at the whole city. This is a citywide comprehensive plan. And then the third point was just about the kind of the the challenge of shifting mindsets. Once you get used to driving everywhere, it gets more and more difficult to encourage people to get out and to walk and bike for short trips when they're able. And so, there's that question of human behavior and how you do that. So I think some really good observations from our group. Some of the gaps that were brought up, Ferry Road again, sidewalk along Seaside Avenue, things that, we've heard of before, extending the Eastern Trail as well. So some really good points brought up in our group. And so to close us out here, I just want to remind everyone we have 2 more meetings left in this topic series. We are taking next week off, so we'll have a week break and then come back 2 weeks from today on May 13th for a meeting to talk about housing and development in the city. And then our 4th and final meeting will be on May 20th to discuss sustainability and resilience. So again, I would encourage everybody today, if you're able to attend, we'd certainly love to see you there again, and help us get the word out. Tell friends, family members, neighbors. We really do want to hear from as many people as we can. And then finally, just to continue to follow the process online. The city website has a page dedicated to the comprehensive plan. You can find a summary of the vision and guiding principles is up in the document library, as well as a summary of the findings from the public survey. And we'll also have some interactive exercises available online as well. So if you check back next week, you'll find a link to our interactive website where you can participate in those, and that'll be another opportunity for people to leave their comments. So with that, it is 7:30, and I just want to thank everybody again for coming out tonight, for participating, sharing your thoughts and ideas with us. We really do appreciate it. We look forward to seeing you again in 2 weeks, and have a great night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.